Earlier this month, ace cameraman Lincoln J and I traveled to the tiny township of Emo, Ontario, population 1,300. Emo has emerged as the new poster boy when it comes to the virus that Dr. Jordan Peterson warned us about several years ago, namely compelled speech. You see, the woke mob, led by sock boy Justin Trudeau, has precious little tolerance for free speech or even the concept of let's just agree to disagree. Nope. Now, compliance is not suggested, but rather ordered under penalty of law. Indeed, if you dare espouse a contrarian opinion these days, there will be blood. Oh, not physical harm, mind you, not yet, but the bully boy enforcers of wokeness, aka provincial human rights tribunals, will force you to bend the knee to their uber woke whims. They will force you to apologize. They will force you to adopt whatever politically correct narrative that they so desire. They will even force you to pay up thousands of dollars, sometimes even tens of thousands of dollars, as a means of economic penalization. Say, do these unelected, non-accountable kangaroo courts sound like a so-called human rights tribunal to you? Or do they, remind you of these guys?
Your culture will adapt to service us. Resistance is futile.
Ah yes, resistance is futile. Self-determination is irrelevant. These days, the human rights racketeers like nothing better than to protect the always fragile feelings of the Rainbow Mafia. You know, the rank-and-file membership of the LGBTTIQQAAPP community. Oh, by the way, I didn't make that up, folks. This is how the Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario wants you to refer to the queer community. Say, what's more gasp-inducing? A 15-letter long initialism, or that this crap is coming from a union whose members teach elementary school children? Then again, when it comes to the marketers on Madison Avenue or hardcore Marxists on campus, as the saying goes, get 'em young, get 'em forever. Which brings me to the most outrageous human rights decision of 2024. That would be the one presented by the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario, which recently ruled in favor of something called Borderland Pride. Borderland Pride is self-described as, quote, the 2S LGBTQIA plus Pride organization for the Rainy River District in northwestern Ontario, Couchiching County in northern Minnesota, and the southeast of Treaty Number 3 territory, end quote. Golly, I'm so offended. The initialism for Borderland Pride is just a mere 10 letters. What a bunch of bigots. Anyway, Borderland Pride is headed up by activist lawyer Douglas Judson. Judson and Catherine Shoemaker launched a proceeding against the township of Emo, as well as its mayor, Harold McQuaker, and councillors Harold Bovin and Warren Tolles. This was due to Judson alleging that the mayor and the two councillors were allegedly, quote, homophobic and or transphobic, end quote, for not recognizing Pride Month in 2020. Fast forward to 2024 and Borderland Pride via its enforcer, the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario, was indeed successful in ordering Emo to recognize Pride Month. As well, the town was fined $10,000, and Mayor McQuaker was personally fined $5,000. McQuaker called this fine extortion and said he would not pay it. Alas, Borderland Pride was somehow able to remove that $5,000 fine, plus allegedly $300 more for whatever reason, from McQuaker's personal CIBC bank account. Say, is anyone else experiencing deja vu regarding what happened to donors of the Freedom Convoy back in 2022? Never forget that twitchy Fraulein Freeland was behind that gross affront.
If your truck is being used in these protests, your corporate accounts will be frozen.
So, as previously mentioned, Lincoln and I traveled to Emo to report on this egregious situation. And what we found very early on is that a deep chill had descended on Emo Township. And by that, I don't mean the minus 28 weather that we experienced. Rather, here we were some 1,400 kilometers from home on a fact-finding mission, but there were no facts forthcoming. The mayor wouldn't talk. The councillors wouldn't talk. Emo's chief administrative officer wouldn't talk. And the Friday council meeting was closed to the public and members of the media. Incredible. So it was that we headed over to Cloverleaf Groceries, which serves as the town's hub. We would do streeters there, get the opinions of townsfolk. These are salt-of-the-earth rural people, after all, who are no doubt outraged and even enraged by the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario for mandating compelled speech. As well, surely they'd be miffed that their tax dollars were being purloined to pay what is in effect a ransom demand. But no, talk about silent night, lonely night. Nobody would come on camera. I can tell you that off the record and off camera, people had plenty to say. They were universally in support of Mayor McQuaker, and they were revolted by the bully boy tactics of both Borderland Pride and the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario. And yet, as I went from one person to the next, seeking a quote on camera, I was repeatedly told, sorry, no comment. People were terrified to speak. Perhaps because if the Rainbow Mafia could successfully ding the town and its mayor for thousands of dollars, maybe they would end up being economically penalized too. Hey, I get it. And suddenly I once again experienced deja vu, this time of the pop culture variety, which is to say, do you remember that Twilight Zone episode entitled It's a Good Life? It's a blend of science fiction and horror, heavy on the horror. Here's the synopsis. The tale is set in Peaksville, Ohio, post-apocalypse. The small town is lorded over by 6-year-old Anthony Fremont. For some unexplainable reason, Anthony has godlike abilities. He boasts such superpowers as telepathy and telekinesis. He can even control the elements. Check out Rod Serling's chilling introduction.
And you'll note that the people in Peaksville, Ohio have to smile. They have to think happy thoughts and say happy things because once displeased, the monster can wish them into a cornfield or change them into a grotesque walking horror. This particular monster can read minds, you see. He knows every thought. He can feel every emotion. Oh, yes, I did forget something, didn't I? I forgot to introduce you to the monster. This is the monster. His name is Anthony Fremont. He's 6 years old with a cute little boy face and blue, guileless eyes. But when those eyes look at you, you'd better start thinking happy thoughts, because the mind behind them is absolutely in charge. This is the Twilight Zone.
You know, folks, in my book, It's a Good Life is easily the most disturbing Twilight Zone episode ever aired. I mean, imagine living in a nightmare scenario in which the people who should be in charge, namely the adults, are forced to cower and acquiesce to the whims of a belligerent child who happens to have omnipotent powers. A child who, when things do not go his way, transforms into a merciless dictator. A child whose temper tantrums result in lethal consequences. It's a Good Life is a fantasy, of course. At least it was when it was originally aired back in 1961. You know, when somebody with a penis was known as a man and someone with a vagina was known as a woman. But in 2024, It's a Good Life, well, it has kind of come true in a way, hasn't it? The empowering element is not an unexplainable supernatural force, but rather tin pot bureaucrats running human rights commissions and tribunals. In our present day, these loathsome bureaucrats force everyday citizens to cower and acquiesce to the demands of individuals such as transgenders who might very well be mentally ill. The human rights racketeers serve as judge, jury, and executioner rather than some 6-year-old mutant. They are forever beholden to radicalized members of the queer community whose feelings seem to be perpetually hurt. Indeed, it is no longer about tolerance and acceptance anymore for the Rainbow Mafia. It's now all about affirmation. And if you do not applaud them, if you are suspected of thinking bad thoughts, you will be deemed a bigot. And yes, you will be punished for that. The irony is perverse given that this is a community that has long clamored for tolerance, yet it now is the most intolerant community of all. And it is these activists who today collectively wield the godlike powers of Anthony Fremont, while normal people behave like the terrified adults residing in Peaksville. It is time to take back society, don't you think? It's time to stand up to the bullies and their enablers who pretend to be the victims and the heroes. And there are positive signs on the horizon, folks. Make no mistake, a huge factor in terms of Donald Trump's landslide victory last month was Americans, including even registered Democrats, rejecting the Biden, Harris, and would-be Waltz woke agenda. Meanwhile, many corporations are now axing their diversity, equity, inclusion programs, realizing, thankfully, that a meritocracy is the way to go when it comes to fairness and, for that matter, the bottom line. And if you believe the polls, and I sure do, the Pierre Poilievre conservatives are headed for a majority government next year. My advice for the Prime Minister in waiting is that he must address the human rights virus that has taken root in this country. And this is a winning platform plank for him, make no mistake. And we do need to address this issue. Otherwise, Canada will remain a real-life version of the fictional Peaksville, Ohio. That is both equal parts chilling and unjust. Indeed, It's a Good Life ends with Anthony willing a snowstorm to descend on the town for no good reason. The adults plead that this will destroy the crops that have yet to be harvested. Anthony doesn't care. And of course, even as starvation looms, the adults in the room do not complain too loudly, lest the pint-sized dictator decides to plant them in the now frozen cornfield. Serling's closing narration is as follows, quote, "No comment here, no comment at all. We only wanted to introduce you to one of our very special citizens, little Anthony Fremont, age 6, who lives in a village called Peaksville, in a place that used to be Ohio. And if by some strange chance you should run across him, you had best think only good thoughts. Anything less than that is handled at your own risk, because if you do meet Anthony, you can be sure of one thing: you have entered the Twilight Zone," end quote. Real-life Canada of 2024 now resembles the fictional Twilight Zone of yesterdecade. Enough is enough already. This must be fixed. Folks, I know you love it when Rebel News brings you the other side of the story, but the fact is, we need your help. Unlike the mainstream media, we do not receive a nickel worth of funding from the Justin Trudeau Liberals, nor would we accept it if it was ever offered. So please go to rebelfieldreports.com. That's rebelfieldreports.com. And if you're able to, kindly make a donation.